love this time of the year. The clocks have just changed. We're officially into British summertime. Spring is well and truly here. And everywhere you look, you can just see the change in the seasons. You can see this little splash of colour appearing in the landscape. Now, I was actually biking along the path over there, and I noticed this tree right from the distance, and I noticed these lovely near white flowers popping in the landscape, and I just thought this has to be my first subject for this video, because the whole aim of today's shoot is to photograph the first signs of spring, and what showed spring better than something like this? The hardest part of flow photography has to be finding the perfect flow to photograph, because as you can see, there's got to be thousands here. Thousands of potential subjects for my flower portrait. But which is the right one? And what I have to keep in mind is, first of all, shelter from the wind, because as you can see, the breeze is blowing things around a little bit. And then the next thing I have to keep in mind is sort of background distance, because I like to have the background out of focus as much as possible. But of course, everything's grown quite close to it, so it's going to be quite hard to get a nice clean background. So that's one thing I definitely need to keep in mind, is sort of finding maybe a patch on a branch sticking out with a nice clear gap behind. But also that gap behind, I have to decide whether I want it to be more flowers in the distance, so you sort of get an out of focus white patch as such, or if I want out of focus leaves, so I get a nice sort of green background. And then of course, finally, the actual thing I photograph has to be pretty much a pristine example of it, because I'm going to be using a macro lens and I'm getting nice and close. It's hopefully going to be super sharp, so I want the perfect subject. And that takes time to find. Well, I'm out with the Panasonic S9, the loop instead of an EVF, and a Sigma 70mm macro lens. To be honest, the macro lens is noisy. The loop solution is less than ideal. And if you've watched my channel, you know I love doing this sort of photography, and I like the size of this because I'm on my bike. I like the fact I can move around on the bike and be a bit more agile. But this solution, it's not really ideal. But I've no doubt the results will be good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually setting a center focus point just to help me try and find a subject. And that one's quite nice. As I said earlier, it's a question I need to decide whether I want a white backdrop behind it or just a clear backdrop. Now what I could do is I could actually go for something like here, where there's a lot of a dark area behind it, and then sort of actually put some external light onto this, use my Adaptalux system and swing it around and try and bring some lighting onto it and try and brighten it up. However, I'm not sure that's the shot I want. So, as I say, it's just a question of just continuing to look handheld until I find my perfect subject, and then getting this camera on a tripod. Right, I've had to manoeuvre a little bit with the tripod, bring the tripod backwards and forwards, simply because with macro, because you're so close and you haven't got zoom, every little bit of a change in distance makes a big difference to your shot. Now the next problem I'm having, as you can see, the breeze is coming and moving my flow constantly, so I'm shooting wide open anyway, because basically I want to try and blur as much as possible in the background. But composition wise it's quite awkward because everything's moving around so much. Now it's given me, in all fairness, it's given me quite a nice fast shutter speed, so I'm just going to take that one. So compositionally I've literally got this flower here on the right hand side of the frame, and then on the left hand side I've just got a branch coming down with another flower which will be out of focus. It's a really simple shot. It is literally just pretty much working on the flower structure and a background going out of focus. A simple floral portrait, if you like. But I'm just going to persevere with this shot, wait until the wind does drop down, get the shot in the bag and put it up on the screen for you. No prizes for guessing the next subject. Obviously it has to be these little white flowers all around here. Now, interestingly, we've got a patch here in bright sunlight and we've got a patch in the shade. Now, I'm going to be more inclined to go looking for something in the patch in the shade, because then I can control the light as much as I want, as opposed to in the sunlight. I've got a feeling I'll end up having to try and use a reflector to either bounce light back in or to basically shade it and cast it into a shadow, which is just like this one. So yeah, I'll have a hunt for the perfect subject and then set my camera up. So for this shot I'm going to use the little Kent Faith tabletop tripod. I have done a review of this tripod. It's a really useful for this kind of photography, simply because you can get so low with it and it's really sturdy. Now I'm hoping this shot's going to be a little bit simpler than the last shot was, because the last shot I was getting a lot of grief from the wind. So as you can see, S9, 70mm macro, Kent Faith tabletop tripod. Loop. Now actually, and I wasn't planning to do this, but what I'm getting a nice flower here with an out of focus flower behind, so I may actually switch to 4:3. So I think if we go to 4:3 here, can you see how that's just simplified the composition drastically? And now I'm not so sure about the lighting. I may actually try the shot like that. So I'm going F8 and I'm going to try and see if I can bounce some light back into my subject. Be made awkward by... Okay, that should do. Yeah, F8 is actually, it's just giving too much in focus. So whilst it may technically be better, I'll put the shot up with F8 for you to have a look at. It's losing the feel of what I'm trying to achieve with this shot, I think. But we're looking nice, we are definitely looking nice. Now the only problem I have is I've got quite a bright patch behind, so I desperately need to get some light in somehow. And here is the final finished image. Well, I'm not going to lie, finding this last shot has actually been quite hard.
Well, as it happens, this photo just didn't work at all. I think the composition was just way too overcomplicated, and I was probably guilty of taking a photo for the sake of taking a photo to finish off this video. So I think I'm going to fast forward the video here straight to the end of the shoot.
As ever, it's been pleasant coming out shooting macro. I love doing this sort of photography. I don't do it enough, and I think sometimes gear has a lot to say about that. To be honest, this has been a hindrance, is the only way of putting it, an absolute hindrance, and I don't like that. Really, that never bodes well. The 70mm macros, it's a really sharp lens, but I feel like I have to get a little bit too close to the subject for my liking. But I could probably tolerate that, but the lack of EVF, whilst I've done a whole video about this, and you know, you can work around it with the loop. The problem is once you get the loop on and you're trying to do macro and you're trying to put your focus on the focusing point, or if you just want to change settings, which I would normally just look for the screen to do because you can't see because of the sunlight, I don't know, it's just not good. Anything that gets in the way of how you work as a photographer and how you take your shots pretty much is unsustainable. So I suspect this little combination will probably be going quite soon. I don't think, definitely for this sort of work, I'm not saying I'll next get rid of it totally, but for macro, yeah, this is not going to do me. But I love the size of the body, so yeah, I've got a few options in mind. Anyway guys, on that bombshell, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, maybe subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you again soon for another one. Thanks for watching.